Chapter 15. Luli. Do you really need another drink? Dahlia bint Adnan held the wine bottle a safe distance from Luli, who sat at the tavern counter, shaking a precariously tipped cup at her. No, Luli frowned, but I want one anyway. Dahlia sighed as she set the bottle back on the liquor shelf behind her. Any more wine and you'll fall off your horse tomorrow during the procession. You don't want that, do you? You may not care what the Sultan thinks of you now, but you certainly will tomorrow. Luli scowled. Let him think what he wants. I'm sick of letting him parade me around. Look at me, Dahlia. She grasped the collar of her horrendously shimmering dara she was wearing. Imagine my embarrassment at being forced to wear this tonight, and worse, being forced to wear it while hanging off of Prince Omar's arm. Prince Omar had been all cocky smiles as he led her around the Diwan earlier that evening, introducing her to guests she'd never wanted to meet. The nobles had gaped at her like she was some treasure on display, cooing over her dress and waggling their brows at her. Luli hated them, all of them. It had been a small relief to escape the nobles tonight, to have been given permission by the Sultan to spend the last night before her terrible journey here in Dahlia's tavern. Listen to yourself. You hardly sound like the Midnight Merchant. Luli laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. The Midnight Merchant, you know, is gone. I may as well be a celebrity now. She focused intensely on the inside of her empty cup. It was the only way to keep her frustrated tears at bay. What was she doing confiding in Dahlia? She'd never broken down in front of the woman, never let her see any of her insecurities. Dahlia may have been a generous landlord and a shrewd confidant, but Luli took great pains to hide the more sentimental parts of her personal life from her. The less vulnerable she was with someone, the easier it was to leave them behind. That was why, even with Ahmed, Luli cut the thought off with a growl. Damn that man for sneaking into my thoughts as soon as I let my guard down. She ignored Dahlia's raised brow and turned her mind to more productive musings. She wondered not for the first time where Kadir was. Though he'd assisted her in the Diwan, he'd been missing since their separation at the night market 3 days ago. A person's reputation is determined by how they interact with others, Dahlia said as she set another bottle down on the shelf behind her. She was cleaning then with a rag, as was her habit when she couldn't sleep. Normally, all the tables would be occupied at this time, and the tavern would be full of customers sharing wine and snacks. But after the incident at the souk, all of Dahlia's patrons had vanished. It was like they decided to lie low after a purge. The Midnight Merchant does not converse with uppity nobles. Luli slammed her cup on the table. Then she did it a few more times because it made her feel better. Dahlia groaned. Oh, for God's sake. It was at that moment the tavern's front door opened and a man stepped inside. Luli whirled, half expecting one of the Sultan's guards, but it was not a soldier. It was Kadir, standing before them in all his unimpressed glory. He raised a brow. Who is this sorry drunk? Dahlia smirked. I don't know, but I have half a mind to throw her out. Luli straightened, too fast. The world blurred, and she had to steady herself against the counter before she could focus on Kadir. Where have you been? He sighed as he slid onto the stool beside hers. A hearty salam to you, too. His gaze grew frosty when he saw the gown she was wearing. A present from the Sultan, she said. I am sure the customers will love it. They won't be able to tear their eyes away. Which is exactly why I should burn it, Kadir said. Dahlia snorted. The tavern keeper had no idea Kadir really could burn the dress with just a snap of his fingers. She slid one bottle onto the shelf before turning to them with her hands on her hips. I'll leave you two to catch up. Burn out the lanterns when you're done. Kadir dipped his head. Tesbahin al-khair. Dahlia responded only with a yawn before heading upstairs, leaving Luli and Kadir alone. Luli felt the urge to throw her arms around his neck and cry into his shoulders. She waited for it to pass before she repeated, Where have you been? Watching from a distance. I know about the quest. Luli thought about the rooms she'd wandered into and of the lanterns that lit those rooms. Kadir could watch her from those fires if he chose to. Fire magic was his affinity after all. Short of shape-shifting into a lizard, there was no other magic he could perform. And what do you think? She mindlessly spun the cup between her hands. About the legend and the lamp. She looked up. About what comes afterward. Kadir stole the cup before she could twirl it across the wood again. I think it's useless to worry about a future not set in stone. As for the lamp, have you tried asking the compass where it is? Lily set her chin on the table with a sigh. It exists. I asked the coin and the compass. Then it can be obtained. And you have no qualms with handing an imprisoned jinn to the Sultan? She paused. Do you know anything about this lamp? Me? Kadir shrugged. Nothing. I was not in the human world that long ago, but if your Sultan's story contains even an inkling of truth, it is likely the jinn he is looking for is an Ifrit. His lips quirked at her puzzlement. Ifrit are what we call the 7 jinn kings in our land. It is a title bestowed upon beings of fire who are powerful enough to use various magic affinities. Ifrit, the word was raw with power, more ominous by far than jinn king. Why didn't you tell me about the Ifrit before? He shrugged. We never run into one, and no one in your land uses the word. Jinn kings may be an inaccurate title, but it does not merit a history lesson. It was true that all the jinn they'd come across specialized in only one type of magic. Opponents like the shadow jinn, who could manipulate the world through a single element. Jinn were rare, and the so-called jinn kings were legend. It was no wonder Kadir hadn't brought up the term before. Fair enough, she sighed. So say we find this all-powerful Ifrit, do we simply hand it over to the Sultan? Who says we have to hand anything over? Kadir angled his head toward the nearest lantern. The flame inside flickered and died, and the other lanterns dimmed shortly after. Kadir's eyes danced with a playful fire that made his irises flash gold and red. Think of the Sultan as a customer to be scammed. I think it is useless to worry about a future not yet set in stone. Maybe Kadir had a point. She had not become so successful by overthinking. You're recommending I leap before I think. How irresponsible of you. Kadir set his hand on the table. I live to be a bad influence. Lily set her hand atop his, savoring the warmth of his touch. It occurred to her that she was becoming drowsy, and that this was only because Kadir had returned and was sitting beside her. It was difficult to let her guard down when he was absent. She had spent the last 3 nights worrying what would become of him on his quest. As he always did, Kadir read the concern on her face. I never thought I'd see the fearless midnight merchant look so defeated before the journey even began. The Ifrit in the lamp isn't the only jinn in danger. She gave him a pointed look. You ought to have more faith in me. I haven't lived this long just to be bested by an arrogant human. He cocked a brow. I have never known you to concede victory to someone either. Luli bristled. Kadir was right. She may have been a citizen of Medine, but she was no one's servant. She refused to let the Sultan destroy the life she had worked so hard to make. You're right. The midnight merchant would never yield to some conceited noble, not even the Sultan. She laced her fingers through Kadir's, suddenly feeling resolute. He'll regret threatening us. Kadir smiled. They always do in the end.